This sample includes all the new input element types, so you have an opportunity to see what they look like, and then I'll take you through the code that's used in order to make this page happen. Now, starting at the top over here on the result pane, you'll see that there's a search box available. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that the cursor is already in that search box. Now, in the past, if we wanted to autofocus on an input element, there were all kinds of different JavaScript gymnastics that we needed to go through to make sure that when that page loaded, the focus went to that input element. Well, now within HTML5, there's a single attribute that you can add to an input element called autofocus, which allows that element to get focused once the page loads. Now, obviously, there's a rule there that you can only have one element have autofocus at a time. But when you apply that attribute to the element, you'll get the cursor automatically focused to that input element. So this is the search box. As I scroll down, you can see that I have a regular text box, but inside this text box, I'm using the placeholder attribute. Now, you might know this as a watermark or a placeholder or maybe some other name, but if I come in and type my name, and you'll notice that the validation is beginning to kick in here as well, because this input element is set as to be required. But if I were to type my name, now that text that appeared in the background has gone away. So the placeholder value is what shows up when the input element is empty. Now, just like I showed you on the slides, I have email, URL, and telephone input types all available here. So if I type in something that's not a correct value for an email, you see that the native validation reports that this is an invalid element. But if I add in an appropriate value for email, then it's satisfied and it shows up like a regular input element. And the same thing for URL. So if I add in gibberish, that shows as invalid. But if I provide a valid URL, then it passes the validation. And there's also an input element for telephone. Now, for a number of years in development, this is an input type numeric. So if I just click on these spin buttons, I'll start getting some values in here. And I can also use the arrow keys on my keyboard in order to go up or down. But notice if I select this and delete it and try to type text or alpha characters, I get a validation error reporting. The next item is a range element. And so if I drag the value here on range, I can select a value within a known range of value. Now, what's interesting is the range element doesn't automatically include some sort of reporting part of the UI to say what the value is. So this is done in JavaScript manually. In fact, this code that I've added over here is what handles reporting out this value. So I'm handling the change event here. And so when this input element changes, then I'm accessing a span, and I'm setting the text equal to the value of the range element. This way, as you slide the range control, you can see the value that's associated with it. I thought it might be important for you to see how to handle that, because often when you have a range slider, you want people to know the exact value that they're choosing. Sometimes you don't, it just depends. But this way you get to see how it works. Now, the next item is data list. So you can see that right here, I have a standard input type equals text. And so I can type a color into here, and it's fully free for me to add whatever I want. But since this has the data list associated with it, if I click on that element again, now I get this nice drop down that has some suggested items that I can click on. So I can save the user some typing a little bit by adding a data list to that input element. And again, when we revisit the code, I'll show you how to associate these two together. For input type equals color, if I click on this input element, then I get a color picker. Again, this is Chrome's color picker. The other browsers may look a little bit different, but either way, it gives you an opportunity to choose a color. So I'll just select this yellow, click OK, and now the input element changes to the yellow color. Now there's a number of different input elements that have to do with dates and times. So this first one here, arrival date, is the input type equals date. So it has a picker where I can go through and choose a specific date. And once that's available, it updates the text in the text box. Here in Chrome, the datetime element doesn't have a specific affordance or any sort of picker, but datetime local does. So I can click on this picker and choose a date and then also select a specific time. So we'll say 3:58 p.m. So now the validation passes for that input element. The next box here is simply the time input type. So here I've got the spin buttons that are able to manipulate the time value found within this input element. And now for month, I can click on this drop down and I get a picker. And first I can choose the year. So let's say 1979. in June. I'll double click on that and that updates the value. And of course, here in Chrome, I have this button here, which chooses the current month. So here I'm in July of 2013. Now for the week element, I can choose on this picker and you can see that I'm able to choose a specific week within the year. And so when I click on this, it's week 33. And I'll show you in the code how you provide values to this element so that you're designating a specific week within the year.